We are live. Hi, Bhaskar. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Hi, Grace. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to dive into our conversation, but
Likewise.
yeah, but right before our show, I want to give a quick shout out to our amazing sponsor. This episode
Mhm.
is brought to you by Nebius, the ultimate cloud for AI innovators. Nebius provides AI infrastructure you can count on, combining reliability and speed with flexibility and engineering support unmatched by hyperscalers. AI leaders like Meta, Shopify, and Hicksfield already partner with Nebius to run their AI workloads. Plus, venture-backed startup can save up to 150K on compute costs when they apply for access. Visit nebius.com or nebius.com/startup to learn more, or use code GRACE. You may get a surprise discount. Okay. Bhaskar, you are such an iconic tech leader because you already started, like, you are the founding CTO of App Dynamics, which is like a huge
Yes,
success. It's
absolutely.
acquired by Cisco for billions of dollars. And maybe we could start with, like, what were some core lessons that you've learned early on in your career, kind of shape you into who you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's really sort of getting into building enterprise software, right? And also like how you kind of really think about how people use products, how their behavior changes when you start finding product market fit. Just things about leadership. So there's a lot we can kind of dig into. So I can either talk about maybe start with like the delta of what has been the evolution in terms of what I've kind of learned or things like that, or we can get into any of the specific topics like the leadership part or what I think is more important now versus what I used to, right? But if I were to really summarize it, it's a bunch of things, right? Like it's how you really improve your decision making. It's how you work with teams and what your leadership is like. What is your product instinct? How do you really separate out, um, what the customer is asking for and what's the pattern and what you need to build? So it's a bunch of those things.
For sure. I have so many questions on that. Maybe we could start with, like, since you're the founding CTO, like, what kind of
Yeah,
problems did you guys kind of solve, and then compared to today, because you're the founder of Bicycle, and maybe we
yeah.
could talk about, like, how do you use the same philosophy on, like, identifying the problem to maybe like building out the team.
Yeah, no, great. Actually, there's some really good parallels in it. So I'd love to kind of dig into that, right? So I think the core problem in App Dynamics we were solving was that this was when, we started in 2008. This was when applications running software, applications running the business, or software running the business, or software defined businesses were starting to get more and more popular, right? So more and more software was basically responsible for the business, and then the monitoring aspect of it was just making sure that your application is working well. It has good availability. It has the right latency. It has good user experience and things like that.
Mhm.
And at that point, what people were still doing monitoring with was infrastructure constructs or code constructs or like so CPU, um, code and hard disk and all of that type of stuff, right? And what was happening at that point though was that things were getting really really distributed, right? Like you'd have like instead of a 10 server application, now you have like 100 different servers, multiple different services running in it. Things were getting more loosely coupled. The rate of change was just getting super high. Um, and at that point, if you're choosing a metric that's really infrastructure specific and that does have no link back to business impact, etc., then it starts getting really, really hard. The other thing that also happens is that you are using code as a proxy to measure, hey, how's this code working? How's this piece of code working? And it's rapidly changing. And so
Mhm.
when you're chasing a metric that's rapidly changing, that also becomes a problem. So
Mhm.
that's the initial problem we solved. We came up with a thesis saying, hey, let's pick a construct that's common, that's stable throughout the life cycle of the application, and usually what that sort of has to do with is with user experience, right?
Mhm.
So if you can change all the code you want, but if you're an e-commerce app, people are still logging in, people are still searching, people are still adding to cart, and people are still checking out. And even if you look at something like Amazon over 15 years, they would have re-architected it 10 different times in very sort of super different architectures. But what matters is how much time does it take for you to log in, right? So login is the core user experience, or checkout is the core user experience construct. And that's what we introduced, and that's really kind of what became App Dynamics, using that unit of measurement, unit of monitoring to really define the category for performance monitoring, and that's the reason why I feel like got off to a really solid start.
For sure. I wonder in terms of like, being the founding CTO, like I guess like at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, it was maybe you and like some other people, but it
Yeah.
fast grew into like a really a company at scale. Maybe we could talk about in the 11 years, like what would you say are like the three core milestone for the company, and then how do you kind of evolve as a CTO? And then now obviously you're the CEO of your own company, and why
Yeah.
don't we about like the applicable lessons that you kind of like took to scale the company? Because I think most people can found a company, but like scaling is a very different story. And then at what point
Yeah.
did you saw the product market fit, and like how do you kind of like apply yourself into like growing to see if something actually have traction?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just try to pick maybe the three good threads to kind of talk about, right? I would say the first one is the PMF one, and how do you navigate it, and what are the decisions you're making, what are the decisions you're not making, because sometimes the decisions you're not making are kind of important. Um, and I think the way to understand the PMF part of it is that, I mean, customers can talk to you about the product and everything else, but generally speaking, they have to have some pain associated with what you're talking about or the area that you're really solving. So that's kind of the first sign, right? If they're basically saying, hey, I do have some way I'm solving it right now, maybe it's messy, maybe it's a hack, uh, that's sort of like an opportunity versus maybe just listening to your idea because it's really cool. So one of the things that we did, in PMF is basically deciding and sort of like being sort of like really firm on our convictions. So number one, we said, let's focus on selling, monitoring business transactions, right? Let's not monitor code. Let's not do profiling and all of that of the applications, but let's just focus on the business transactions. That's number one. Number two, we said, let's basically anchor on the operations team. So typically, when you have application monitoring products, they used to be basically serving all teams, right? Like, so you have dev, you have test, you have QA, you have staging, you have production. And what we said was, let's just build a tool for production. And when we basically have a license, let's just have a production license. Let's not even have any other licenses. If someone wants to run it in dev, we're not going to give it to them at a much lower price. So that conviction, that kind of really helped. So what that did was made the product decisions easier, right? So that's number one, right? Like, what are the decisions you make? How do you stick to kind of what you want to do in terms of the PMF part of it? Once you start doing the PMF part of it, then I think you start seeing really, as the traction picks up, then the next sort of level you get towards is that how do you make decisions in day-to-day product in terms of picking up the right sort of like feature, et cetera, et cetera. And here what I've seen is when you have conversations with customers, you have to be able to separate out what is the pain and what is the prescription, right? Like, because sometimes customers will ask you directly for features, and sometimes that's not the right way to do it. You have to see a pattern, and once you see a pattern, then you really kind of say, oh, this is how I want to apply it, so that this is applicable for the tens of customers that are going to sign up tomorrow, versus like what I'm basically doing for this particular customer or answering their kind of question. And then the third one probably is just the leadership part. Like, how do you start thinking about not just making decisions, but how do you sort of like transfer some of your decision making, some of the clarity that you're kind of getting to when you're not in the room, when you're sort of like away and your team's making those decisions. How do you sort of like really enable that? So those are probably three things I can think of. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
I wonder, so like maybe we could start talking about like bicycle AI, because of like you guys are on the agents area like way before a lot of people. Maybe we could talk about the agentic analytics landscape, and then
Yeah.
how did you kind of like arrive at the problem?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the simple way of describing Bicycle is that it's an AI analyst for revenue critical business teams, yeah, like really, really fast moving revenue critical business teams. It focuses on revenue critical data, right? So what we help companies do is we help them detect important changes in their business. Our philosophy is we're sitting on top of data, but our philosophy is data is interesting only when it moves, right? Otherwise, you're just kind of viewing it, and it's not really lending itself to making decisions, et cetera, et cetera. So we help companies detect really important changes, and the changes could be basically saying, hey, I have a KPI. The KPI is basically revenue. The KPI is basically, payment approvals or payment volume, it could be an inventory KPI. It could be sort of like a conversion KPI. It could be, click-through rate, or et cetera, right? But then we detect important changes in their KPIs, understand why they happened, and then take the next best action with the right guardrails. So we like to talk about it as deal, detect, explain, act, and learn, right? So that's the loop, because what agents are supposed to do is be proactive, right? And are able to kind of really do the reasoning in terms of figuring out why a KPI changed. So that's their job. So in this case, the agent we basically built had the job of really what is the KPI. So you can basically spawn a bunch of agents, each one looking at a particular KPI, each one looking at a particular segment, and then starting with detection. And we actually use machine learning for the detection part, because again, there are things that you need to be deterministic. There are things that you need to be probabilistic, right? Like, which is kind of the reasoning part. So that's the high level. So to make it more concrete, what are the type of scenarios? In retail, you might say, why are orders up but margin down? And the agent is actually trying to solve the problem, trying to figure out like why that's actually happening. And so the goal is to not give teams another dashboard. The goal is, how do you help them move faster from a signal to decision, to actually make the decision? And that's the core product idea. And obviously we can go deeper in it. Yeah.
For sure. Since I feel like the agent space, so tracking revenue is obviously extremely important. Maybe we could, if you want to do a demo, we can do a demo as well on here. I don't know if you're. I feel
Oh,
I give people a hard time as because I'm like, hey, you want to do a demo on the spot, but
no, actually, you know what? I definitely wasn't prepared for it, but let me just quickly, find it, fire it up, and then I can probably see if I can actually do that. Right? 1 second.
meanwhile,
Uh,
shout out to some of our listener who comments. Hi, Suman. Hi, Devaria. I have, yeah. So I guess like maybe, yeah, like during this time, I'm just like trying to I wanted to like, yeah, okay, let's do the demo first and then
yeah,
we'll do the business
yeah.
logic.
I think, yeah. So this is totally on the fly, but let me just
Yeah.
go ahead and
If
do
you
it.
have some, it's very
Yeah,
it's very similar to Zoom.
sure. So just share screen. I'll share my entire screen, and then boom. So let me know if you can see this.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what I just did right now is that you're in the bicycle sort of application, and what we do, number one, to understand is that we're actually very specific towards verticals. So the only verticals we support right now are retail, travel, and payments.
Mhm.
And this is because we want it to be really specific to that vertical where we're solving that particular problem. And as we sort of like really introduce the product to the customer, we're speaking a language that they're comfortable with, right? So we don't want to give them another way of saying, hey, do this dashboard. Here's sort of like your data. Here's your dimensions, et cetera, et cetera. So it becomes something where you're like, okay, I understand this language, whether it's the business, whether it's the data. So let me just walk you through some of it, and then we can kind of dig deeper. So these are the agents, right? Like so the unit of how we work with this is basically an analytics agent that automates and does the analytics for you. So these are some of the agents we created. So this is specifically a demo set up for, as you can see here, the fashion specialty retailer, right? So there's these agents, which is looking for revenue shift analysis, category revenue shortfall, online versus store channel sales. So this probably is the easiest to get in. So let's get into this part. So when I get in, what it's doing is, and this is actually, we are going to launch self-service in a couple of weeks, and this is actually going to be available for everybody to actually look at themselves without login. So it's actually exciting that we're kind of going through this. So now I think we're inside the product, and there are 4 particular features that the product basically has, right? How does it really break down the data based on the fact that this is an agent? So the first 2 features that are sort of like that everybody is really familiar with is chat and dashboards, right? So dashboards, everybody understands. What we do is our AI actually creates these dashboards for you and really sets them up. You can obviously also chat with the data. So think of these as pull features. You're pulling data, you're asking questions and things like that. Then we have 2 other features. One of them is alerts, and the other one is data stories. So what alerts is let's say you're looking at a dashboard and you're looking at a KPI called revenue, and you're looking at it over multiple regions like north, south, east, west, however your business is split in. Instead of you looking at the dashboard, the AI looks at the dashboard for every segment, and when something is off, it basically alerts you. It also goes to the next step, which is understanding why things are happening and what next to do about it, right? So again, going back to the loop. So that's what alerts are. Similarly, instead of finding out at that point in time if you want to look at revenue for a region over a month, over a quarter, over a week, etc., then you want to look at all the dimensions, analyze them in depth, and then understand what's actually really happening. And that is basically data stories, which is the narrative about it, right? And not just sort of like high level up down kind of numbers, but the causality along with it. So those are kind of the features. Let's start with sort of like the unique ones, right? So this is an alert that you're seeing where it's basically saying, hey, there's a drop in average selling price, on this particular city. So it's very fine grained. And you can actually go ahead and open this alert. What that takes you to is basically a page that actually tells you, here's the drop in selling price, here's why the agent basically caught it, and then kind of really breaks down the cost. So obviously we are kind of really simulating this. This is all test data. But what it's kind of basically saying is that this was caused by a delay in a promotional campaign, which drove so-and-so discounted order, right? So the reason we call our company Bicycle is when a KPI moves, when a shift in data happens, there are 2 factors that drive it, right? There is the business factors, which is a promotion is late, my inventory is off, my price is off, my competitor is actually doing a better price, etc. Or it could be a technical factor, which, hey, my application is not working, it has high latency, I see some errors and things like that. And the reason we call it Bicycle is that we look at both factors equally, look at both factors together, because both these wheels run the business. So that's kind of what's happening right now. It actually did the analysis, found out that the average selling price is off because of a promotional campaign. You can actually look at it in terms of what it really did, in terms of the decision tree. So it basically looked at price by city is off, then it narrowed it down by dimension, narrowed it to the city, and then basically evaluated multiple drivers, right? And some, one of them it accepted, and the others it basically, rejected, right? Like, so it wasn't a product mix shift, it wasn't a discount code, it wasn't sort of like an application issue, but it was like a promotional email campaign that was, delayed, right? And then this is the analysis. This is everything that it did with respect to looking at when did the Klaviyo thing start, and did that sort of like impact it, things like that. So that's really the high level of how the agent is really proactively kind of doing it. But we also obviously have the usual features. We actually all automatically create these dashboards. So these are the dashboards created automatically. But then you can also chat and create dashboards. Sorry, I clicked on that again. But if you go to actually this is a read-only demo that I logged into, but you can, generally speaking, create a dashboard, add a dashboard with just a prompt, right? Let me see if I can actually. Sorry, I wasn't actually fully ready for the demo as we hadn't talked about it, but this is the data story part of it, which is look at a quarter, look at a month, and then analyze channel revenue decline, right? And so this actually creates a slide deck, which is a good executive way of looking at this, right? Like, so revenue fell, so and so, no channel cannibalization. So, but channel cannibalization did not happen. And then this is sort of like the numbers. It'll have the causality. It'll have like a lot of the sort of like depth within that. And then finally, you have chat. You can obviously, click at some of the options that are already given to you. What is the trend of conversion rate on a daily basis for this month? And it'll then interpret it as that sort of like, as that core sort of mapping to the underlying data. And the AI it'll function as a data analyst, figure out the right queries, and then it'll kind of go from there. So this actually happens either directly on the warehouse, or sometimes there's fragmented data sources, and then we're able to merge them. But yeah, this is sort of how easy it is. If you look at the market right now in agentic analytics, most of the players basically just rely on this part. This is sort of like a table stakes feature, and this is how everybody's doing it. But the reason I actually showed you the alerting and the data story part of it is that we think of ourselves as a domain-specific agent, and then evaluate things like dropping conversions, et cetera, without anybody having to tell us, because we create this underlying data model that helps you go from a signal to the decision, right? So tying it back to App Dynamics, think of App Dynamics as how do you go from a technical signal to action, and in this case, you're going from a business signal to an action. So that's kind of high level. Hopefully, that was just we totally winged it, but hopefully that made sense when you saw the product.
I think it's really critical to like really analyze, especially for like an e-commerce company or like travel, because there's so many factors as like a human kind of like behave on how they shop. It's like, oh, you can see a TikTok ads and then it just like see the revenue jump, but like when the live stream is dead and then you just like see it, so you never really know what's going on. So like
you never really know.
Analytics is really important. I have like two questions on that. One is like, why like e-commerce first? Because I think I would think of like e-commerce is the big challenge is like, unless you're targeting, let's say, a few big shops like Etsy Lauder, or like someone who owns a million different product, or some company that, just in general, have like a really chain kind of evaluation on like the product. It's otherwise I would assume it's really hard to sell door to door. Let's say you go on Shopify and then you sell the top 2,000 stores, right? It's like you have to convince everybody. So I guess like, how do you think about the revenue model, and like and how do you kind of like targeting these like clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So number one, I think when we decided on the wedge to go in and sort of start working with the right verticals, we basically thought about transactional businesses, right? And the reason why transactional businesses are important with respect to analytics is that the rate of decision making, the rate of change is super high. So you have to keep up with like how many decisions you're making, every week, every day. As your sort of revenue is being done through sort of like through software, right? Because every click matters. You could lose money on every click. If you take out the whole transactional business notion, then I mean, sure, all of your customer click data or the events that come from customers are important, but they might not impact your revenue at that point, at the same day or the same week. So that's the reason we chose transactional businesses. Retail specifically, yes, it's definitely one of them, and it's kind of a large market, so that's why we're kind of really building for that. And it's just an easy way for someone to explain that whether you're working through conversion, whether you're working through inventory, and the speed of it, especially when you apply it to things like quick commerce, it's very, very high, and there's sort of like the time you take to make a decision with respect to data. So that's basically why we picked that, right, to start with. Yeah.
For sure. So like the high volume, and then also like
high volume. Yeah.
Decision making. So I guess like how do you price the product, since like nowadays like everyone is pricing based off like outcome or usage, and is that like based off like how much transaction that the company has been made, or how do you think about the pricing the product?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So the way we price the product is it's actually we are protecting revenue, right? Like we are basically looking at the business signals that impact your KPIs, the business signals that are coming from your KPIs and your core KPIs. There's usually like 10 to 12 of them that you really focus on, and that they drive your business. And obviously you can slice them, you can segment them any way you want, like, whether it's region, whether it's different merchants, whether it's different products, whether it's different SKUs. All those are part of the same KPIs, right? They're still segmented. So number one, because we are really focused on that, we use GMV as a proxy of how much revenue we're protecting, because that's kind of what the agents are doing, protecting that revenue and working with that revenue. So that's the first one. Then the second part of it is basically how many KPIs. So there's going to be a base tier of X amount of KPIs, and then you can actually buy KPIs more, more KPIs as you want. But within that framework, what really happens is you can do any number of use cases. You can build any number of agents on that data that you onboarded for those KPIs. And then you can also onboard as many users as you want. So we don't have seat-based pricing or anything like that. So in a way, it's outcome-based because we are protecting the GMV, and every KPI shift, every sort of KPI we work with is kind of directly responsible for that. Yeah.
For sure. When it comes to when you're thinking about like, I guess like which sub-market from I guess like from the retail space to segment, like I guess like how do you think about the go-to-market strategy? Would it be like we should go after the fashion company first, or should we go after food and bath, and like how do you think about like the actual sub-specific character a sector to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, definitely some of it is based on your early conversations, your network, who you kind of like run into, who you start working with. But there's also one of the things we're doing within retail is to start targeting sort of like Shopify Plus, right? Because that's a really good segment where there's velocity and where we can actually get all of that. So what we did is built like a layer on top of what we have for Shopify specifically, and within Shopify, I picked a couple sub verticals like fashion, where again, just doing some segmentation in it and trying to figure out like where there's good volume, where there's a good way of like sort of getting in, where they'll be sort of more ready for self-service than the others, where they'll try it out themselves. So the Shopify ecosystem is actually really solid at doing self-service, doing things themselves. So again, we are doing a series of launches next month, starting with the basic self-service, and then we'll introduce self-service for Shopify. But that's some of the decision making that we had in it's a combination of like who we talked to initially, and then also the next sort of level of doing some segmentation of like where it's going to be really easy for self-service.
For sure. I guess like when it comes to like now we chat a lot about the product. Maybe we could talk about the AI trends or like AI agent right now. So like I feel like nowadays like everyone is building an AI agent, and nowadays, like
Yeah.
from the revenue agent, I guess, like, how do you think about, like, because I this past weekend I went to Pastrona's Series B Gala. So like essentially they're building in the agent testing space, and like obviously agents are doing a lot of long-term thinking now. Like
Yeah.
so instead of like in the past, it's like, oh, we do like a one-off action. Let's say I use agent to purchase Meta Shopify ads or something. But like
Yeah.
but now I could be leveraging agent to help make long-term decisions on.
Yeah.
So in bicycles case, maybe it is AI agent that help you decide on like, hey, here's our go-to-market strategy based off like, our
Sure.
agent observe like when it drop or when it doesn't drop or something. How do you think about like the agent trends and the agent orchestration, and like since you mentioned like it helped you study like which part actually created the drop off points, so
Yeah.
obviously you can compare the data with the previous performed data, but how do you
Correct.
think about which reason should be coming up first? So like, how do you kind of like which piece of data is actually important for the agents compared to like in
Yeah.
the past, like human?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I can actually probably ground the answer in what we do at Bicycle in terms of what our strategy is, right? So the way we think about the when you have data and when you need to make a decision, based on some shift in data, there are really two parts to it in terms of the role you need to apply to it. One of the roles is basically being a business analyst, right?
Mhm,
Which is like, does it even matter, right? Not every signal needs a reaction.
mhm,
Some signals are more important than the others. And what signal is more important is actually sort of one of the most important things to decide. Like, is it noise or is it something you need to do? Is it real? Um, and then you sort of like make a decision on it. So that is what a business analyst does. They are connected to the business. They understand data, but they're not primarily a data person, and they focus a lot more on what are the right numbers, what's the thing to anchor on. Like even when a KPI is off for a particular city, for a particular region, that might not be your top performing region, and maybe that's sort of less important than something happening elsewhere, which is more important. So that's number one, like business analyst. The second part that you need is somebody who's a data analyst. So once you understand this is worth digging into, how do you then start looking at the data, segment that data, slice that data, analyze that data, and everything else? So that is what a data analyst does. And they're very, very solid and especially deterministic ways of looking at data to come up with like, this is the next step to do. So when you combine things, right, you have to combine a business analyst and a data analyst, and that's what Bicycle is, right? To make decisions, it combines a business analyst and a data analyst in a box. And the reason I bring that up is that for us, the LLMs are the orchestrators or are the business analysts, right? They understand like what is important in the business. They understand what are the key metrics. They also understand when a key metric breaks, like revenue is dropping for a particular business, within retail, etc. What are the top factors that can happen, right? So, for example, if you have an agent, agent like coupled with the LLM part that's working with Shopify, it knows the ecosystem. It already knows the ecosystem that they'll use Klaviyo, they'll use Gorgias, et cetera, et cetera. So it can then recommend based on the KPI that's moving on what is the theory, what are the potential causes that can happen, what are the it knows the stacks that they use, it knows the tooling that they use, so it'll recommend that. It'll also know based on the Shopify ecosystem on what are typical actions that are taken when decisions are made. So the LLMs can actually come up with, like, once you tune them, you can come up with the hypothesis of how do you go from signal, which is a deterministic way of understanding when a KPI moved, to the probabilistic ways of determining what are the typical causes and what are typical actions associated with it. So that's how the orchestration is helped through with this probabilistic layer, and then you combine that with the right deterministic analysis, and then you get like a really good solution. It's broadly applicable for multiple places, right? Like enterprise software, I think it'll go from informing work, like showing you something, to actually helping you do work. And that's the orchestration part. And that's why the AI comes in and going in, taking you from point A to point B, and not just saying, here's what's happening and giving you basic visibility, or just kind of informing you on this is what you might have to do, but it's actually helping you, run the business. Does that make sense?
For sure.
Yeah.
I wonder, so like since I guess like there is like uh 2 to 3 part that like I feel like you guys kind of like stand out. One is like agentic or AI operational piece, and then
Mm-hmm.
there is like the data observability and kind of like incident tools like area that you guys are kind of like building. And then the other part is like the GTM intelligence piece about the product. So
Yeah.
and when you're looking at these different sub-segment of the product, what would you say is like the hardest part to build, or like what sets you guys apart from like many of these other like business analytics tools?
Yeah. I think the hard part is really actually, like I was mentioning before, right? How do you like weave in the deterministic and the probabilistic stuff, right? So
Mhm.
deterministic basically needs like really solid, machine learning fundamentals and everything else in making sure that you're looking at changes in data, shifts in data. So you don't want the LLM to do the math. You don't want the AI to kind of figure out that, hey, I should actually look at this or look at that, or this is a change in revenue, this is a change in conversion, right? So you want that to be like really, really deterministic. So that's the detect part of it, which is like you're detecting a move in a KPI.
Mhm.
The next part after that is that like what to really focus on, because let's say your your revenue in a particular region is actually down, right? The next part is to what is the surface area that you really want to focus on. So, for example, your payments are failing. They could be failing for American Express, payments that are being done on an iOS, particular version, right? It can be that specific, and that's a small segment that's actually starting to impact revenue. Then you figure out, okay, this is the particular segment, like it's iOS in California on American Express that's basically failing. So now you have a focus set to really focus on.
Mhm.
Then the next step is, why could that be happening? So that is the difficult part of it, because now you've gotten through the basic data analysis, and now you have to kind of look at like, what should I be looking at to triage this issue, triage this drop. And the same thing applies for an opportunity, by the way. When things are accelerating, you want to double down on it, so the same thing applies to it. But coming back to the drops situation, then you're saying, what changed on iOS? Was there a new release that happened? What changed with American Express? Did they tighten any authentication or something like that? Again, total sort of hypothetical scenario. And that's where the harder problem is, to kind of navigate through, build that reasoning layer, and come up with the hypothesis of like, this is actually what happened, because then you can actually start linking that hypothesis to what can be done about it. So that's the fuzzy part. The
Yeah.
reason why this is possible now is that, obviously at AppD, we did a great job with, technical signal to action, technical troubleshooting, um, the infrastructure part, the code part, the metrics part was always machine readable, right?
Mhm.
Like machines could go in and say, this is the latency, this is the response time, these are the errors. Well, what I meant is load, not response time. So latency, load, and error rate, and then able to come up with like an analysis of what's wrong, right? Because it's all like those core metrics.
Mhm.
But when you go into business factors and analyze, why is this happening? Whether it's pricing, whether it's inventory, whether it's external factors like weather, whether it's market factors, those are all very fuzzy, and you need sort of like a reasoning layer. You need like a fuzzy sort of analytical layer that can actually do that, and that's what AI does with language models. You can actually now start doing that. So that's what enables it now. But to put that all together, to combine the deterministic part of it, to combine the probabilistic part of it, and sort of build a solution where explaining a movement in data and why that's happening, that is the hard part.
Mhm.
Yeah.
For sure.
Mhm.
I wonder, so like when you're thinking about the next like 3 to 5 years, so since like you guys
Yeah.
have built bicycles since like 6 years ago, I guess like
Yeah.
in the next, like, call it like 3 to 5 years, what would be the biggest like revolution that we're
Yeah.
gonna be seeing? And then what are some like kind of like technology that you're currently implementing that you're really excited about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think definitely just on the thread of, so we started off with transactional data, right? Like, so, and to do the whole loop of sort of going from detection to explanation to action. Um, um, the next step there is how do you learn from the decision making and have a closed loop? So some of our customers are already implementing closed loop decision systems. Some of them are basically live. So we, as I mentioned, we work with travel. And what one of our customers does is when there are issues with the supplier where revenue is being impacted, they actually run a webhook to take out the exact supplier. And the magic is not running the webhook. Running the webhook is pretty straightforward. But the magic is basically what is the specific supplier which bicycle is supplying to the webhook as a parameter, right? So that is what drives action. That's what drives AI assisted action, right? So over time, that's kind of what we really kind of want to do, where it starts with just sort of like the signal part, and it's a maturity curve, right? It starts with the signal, but then it goes into explaining why the signal is happening and then taking action on it. And so that's not sort of like a day one thing. It's a maturity thing that we have to work with customers slowly to kind of get it. But in general, also, I feel that's the trend where enterprise software is going to help people do the jobs, do sort of like the next step, and run the business versus just informing them, just functioning as a little bit of like a dashboard or informing them about the work, right? So that's the area that I think we are the most excited about going into that region. But at like a basic level, we want this. We are obviously started off with transactional data, but we want this to be much broader beyond that, and look at sort of other data sets also, where the specificity that we're bringing to all of this, how do we sort of like make it broader so that it goes beyond transactional? So obviously a lot more to talk about, but like those are two things that I can probably just start with in terms of what we're excited about. Yeah.
For sure. So I guess like in the future, so nowadays, like the people who are actually, I guess, like operating the tool is probably, let's call it, I would assume it's like the sales CRO, or like maybe
Sure.
even the marketing manager, or like how do you think about like who is actually owning this part of the business, and how do you kind of
Yeah.
like actually meet the decision makers right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are two audiences, right? Like, so one is people who own the data, they who run the data, own the data, like prepare the data, and then basically make sure that that data is consumable, that data is accurate, that data is trusted, right? So that is the data and analytics team. So that could be people working in data engineering, or the analysts themselves that are determining how to analyze this data. Like, what's the path to analyze a movement in data to understanding like why it's really happening? So that's one team. That's the team that typically like looks at this and buys this and owns this solution. Then the other side is the business that actually consumes it, right? Because the data and analytics team is really doing all this work, but they're not really actively making decisions on top of the data. They're
Mhm.
enablers, right? Like they're force multipliers. So one way of thinking about bicycle is that think of bicycle as a cursor for the analytics team, for the analysts, right? Because cursor gives developers an unfair advantage. It doesn't sort of mean that they stop coding. They actually 10x their output, because instead of writing every piece of code, they're reviewing and they're strategizing. Similar to this, what is an analyst doing? It's not that they're stopping analyzing. They're basically really kind of connecting the dots, where the AI is doing a bunch of that work, and they're kind of really reviewing it. They're making sure that it's on the right track. They're tuning it. and they're using it to their advantage, and it becomes like an unfair advantage. So that's what I would say. Bicycle is an unfair advantage to the analytics team. On the other hand, so that's kind of the team that actually runs data and preps, but they're not making the decisions. On the other side, you have the business team, which needs to sort of like know at the right time when something important is really happening, especially that's impacting revenue. They need to deeply understand it without being a data expert, and they need to act on it. So that's the other part of the product that actually helps the business team basically work through that. So these are our two stakeholders. The data team basically owns the solution, and the business team basically runs with it. They're both executives who care about like how things are at a monthly, quarterly level. Or you have owners of KPIs who basically just like really work with a particular type of KPI, right? It could be a revenue KPI, it could be an inventory KPI, like a category KPI or things like that. So that's who we really work with.
Mm. I wonder, so like since like nowadays like a lot of the I guess when it comes to building the team,
Mm-hmm.
many people are hiring a lot of like researchers, and then some of them are bullish about like we just want like a person to like build the whole thing. So like what's your philosophy on hiring, and where would you say is like where the most like interesting talents are at that like maybe not many people are looking at?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think in hiring, the most important thing is you want people with a high degree of curiosity, high degree of like they have to have some sort of risk appetite in terms of, hey, I want to do kind of something risky because it really challenges me. That challenge part is kind of very important. To your point, obviously the AI researcher part of thing is actually really become pretty important, because the AI researchers are coming up with a lot of strategy that that really helps with it. So there is a lot of that happening in the industry. But I think in terms of the talent, there is we have some folks in the US, some folks in India as well. AI is a pretty big phenomenon in India, and I was really surprised by the level of AI talent and the depth of AI talent that we started getting in India. And what's really happening is people are starting, super young, right out of college. They've actually done a whole bunch of work on running a bunch of AI projects, and doing a lot of AI things themselves, and being very hands-on with it. And what AI has also done is obviously made coding so much more accessible, right? Like it just makes it much easier, where the bottleneck isn't sort of actually coding, but the bottleneck basically becomes the strategy, what to actually build, how to actually build it, as well as validation of like, is what you've built sort of like real, and is what you've built like solid. So I feel like those are two skills that are going to be super, super important over time, because it's not just the fact about, you need to build X and then you need 10 engineers. But the skill that's going to be like super, super important is basically like, what's kind of the strategy? What are you building? What's your judgment? What's your taste in kind of building that? And again, I think you'll find really hybrid personalities. It doesn't need to be only a product manager. You can be an engineer putting on a product manager hat. You can be an engineer putting on like a broader sort of strategy hat, and developing that way. Or you can have a product manager sort of like becoming more technical and relying more on vibe coding to actually create a layer that is like really, really interesting. And then the same thing with like, how do you validate? Like that's one of the unsolved problems. I mean, obviously we have evals and things like that, but how do you validate that something you've built, using AI is doing the right thing, and not just doing the right thing in a basic demo, but like, what are the corner cases? Does it actually stand the test of time and things like that? So I feel like those are two roles that I constantly think about, and that's kind of talent that you really need to sort of like to add, and that's going to be a multiplier.
For sure. I really like what you said about like being curious, as well as like
Yeah,
having risk appetite, since like it is
yeah,
we're working on startup anyway. But one of the things that you said, not this is there's no but by the way, I'm just like trying to
yeah.
look at my
Sure.
one of the things that you said on a different podcast is like you said that agents needs three things. One is like clean event stream, and then one is like common definitions, and then one is like latency that match with the decision speed. And I guess like when it comes to these like different things, what would you say are you know whether it's like a startup or mid-market company like evaluate when they see if they're like ready for that?
Yeah, no, I think it starts with the fundamentals, right? So the way we think about how data and analytics people work with Bicycle is that we look at their playbook as how do they build, how do they tune, and how do they govern, right? So you always start with building the right foundation, and building the right foundation is identifying what is basically trustworthy data, and you're kind of just building that. And that could be on top of a warehouse, that could be from a streaming system, et cetera, et cetera. So you need to make sure that there's consistency there in terms of how KPIs are generated, what are the formulas that you're kind of looking at to generate the KPIs, et cetera. And so that's the starting point of it. The foundation, along with data, also needs context, right? So the context basically is you've already done years of work on top of that KPI to understand why that KPI breaks, why that KPI moves, and you already know and have a lot of context on what is typically done when changes in the KPI happens. So the more you feed all of that to AI, it gives you context on, it gives the AI context on what has happened in the past and how to really interpret some of your decision making and what are typical patterns. So the recommendations it makes, the orchestration it makes is a lot better. Then you start getting to the next level, which is tuning the detection, tuning the explanation layer. So tuning the detection is making sure that if you're using machine learning, like, are you using the right algorithms? Are you using the right baselines in terms of, because sometimes data is very dense where you have tons of orders flowing through for a particular product, and sometimes data is very sparse. You have a new product and you have relatively less traffic. So the math you're using in the background, the detection techniques you're using in the background need to be really sound, and so you need to make sure that's actually really solid. And then the next super important part is that when a KPI moves, have you connected it with the right systems so that the AI can go in and analyze itself and come up with the thesis of why the KPI is moving, right? Have you connected with marketing automation? Have you connected with your ad stuff? Have you connected with external factors? Have you connected with pricing, inventory? Sometimes what you could be doing is that you're scraping pricing from your competition and then feeding it to the AI so that it can analyze whether competition is selling at a better price, right? So all of those are on the table. And then finally, if you say, okay, I've looked at the movement in data, I've identified why it's actually happening, and I now want to take an action, on it. The actions need to have guardrails, right? Because actions always need accountability, and it's not that, hey, the AI did something, whatever, right? Like, obviously you have to have the audit and everything else, but you also have to have the guardrails of what can be done, what has been safe in the past, and things like that. And that's really all what really goes into A, building an enterprise product, and also B, implementing it really well for this cycle.
For sure. I wonder, so like since another thing is I feel like in the app dynamic era that like you guys are very focused on, I would say free down, like I guess back in times I think it's more towards like PLG because of it's like there's like a free download and then it drives like over 60% of leads for the very heavy enterprise market. And what would you say is the current GTM motion for Bicycle that like you feel like whether it's like maybe community or PLG or content or maybe just targeting agents? So I feel like now there's a only marketing to agents. So how do you think about discoverability or like conversion for the company or space?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of definitely a little bit of an evolving space, and what we've done the last few months is just being heads down and building a product where the customer can actually, or somebody trying it out off the website can actually bring their own data whether that's like CSVs, exported data, or whether that's connecting to Snowflake or BigQuery or something like that, right? And so that's what we built, and we're going to launch that next month, and we're pretty excited about it. That's going to really define the motion, because there's no core analytics product out there where people can go and start doing things themselves. And also what we're offering is a vertical solution. So that's also pretty exciting, where you just give it data, and what I showed you in the demo, it's actually going to come up with agents like this, like that itself, right? Where it's giving you like a problem to solve. It's already sort of like suggesting what are the things it can do on top of the data. So I that's the thing that we're putting everything behind. So we literally just kind of built it, just released it to like alpha, beta, some customers who tried it out, some of our sort of folks in the network who tried it out, and then next month we're kind of ready to launch it. And so that's going to be the motion, where if you're truly an AI product, then you have to sort of like put it out there where people can try it themselves, because the experience is the main thing, right? Like the experience sort of like really drives it, and you should be able to figure it out and not needing a ton of help. So that's the conviction we're going towards, and that's what's going to drive our market motion.
For sure. I want to be mindful of the time. Maybe we do like a quick web round for you. What's your favorite book?
What's my favorite book? I like Shantaram. It's a really good book based in India.
Love it. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Biggest impact in my career, I think I would say, actually working with Jyoti's been really great. Was the CEO at AbbDie, and he's a friend as well. And I think working with him day to day, operationally, definitely that's been like a really big impact.
Oh, I have a piggyback question. I wonder, so what would you say is like something that you guys have done right at AppDynamics compared to all the competitors that kind of like help you become a really huge company fast?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that we really focused on was, the product is always like super important, and then some of the decisions we made in just like not doing something, right? Like I was saying earlier, like not having like a development version, not having like a QA version, and sticking to our guns in terms of this is kind of what we're going after, where because a lot of times a product is really chasing down the opinion you have, and we had strong opinions and this is how it needs to be done. And at some point when customers say this is how it should have always been done, that's when you know that sort of like you're creating a category, and that's how we basically created a category. And so that conviction really helped us.
Love it. So who would you invite to your dinner party?
Who would you invite to a dinner party? We're talking about like anybody. What's the is it like amongst my friends or people I know, or anybody just sort of like
it's your party, so
it's my party. Inviting someone like Elon, right? Like, so I think somebody who has sort of like the depth of the depth he has in what he works on, and the big picture, like what he's thinking about, like a lot of people understand multiple years later. So obviously hugely inspirational, and the way he kind of like really solves problems, the way he scales, the way how quickly he gets from like point A to point B is just incredible. It's ridiculous. Yeah.
Love it. Where can we find you outside of work?
I think I'm reasonably outdoorish. I'm a beach person, and thankfully our area, I'm in the Bay Area, obviously has like pretty amazing stretches, and so that's where I kind of like to go to kind of relax. Unless I'm basically watching sports, I'm a big sports buff. So depending on, obviously excited about the World Cup right now. But yeah, those are probably two spots.
Love it. Well, Bhaskar, thank you so much for coming to the show today. It was such a amazing conversation about everything AI agent and analytics.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks
for having me.
And stream. It's ending. By the way, shout out